As I mentioned in my first BBC a few weeks ago, that I chose to look more deeply into the homage to the 21 Taras in order to better understand her incredible wisdom and bodhicitta. I also came to realize that I had received an empowerment quite a few years ago. Went to Seattle. I think Venerable Jigme and I, we had an empowerment to the 21 Taras from Jado Rinpoche, which I totally forgot about until I started thinking about these verses. So I wanted to reconnect with that, with my relationship to her. But in the process of going through these homages, I'm finding out a lot of things are coming up for me. There's a lot more to unpack for me personally in this than I had anticipated. So there are some of the things that I have sort of thought about as I've been beginning to look deeply into each of these verses. Is first of all to appreciate that His Holiness had advised us that because of the pandemic, it would be so helpful for us to be able to do the Green Tara practice. So I took that really deeply to heart. He also, just as kind of these preliminary thinking as I worked into these verses, his statement over and over again, particularly this winter, that logic and reason must be the main approach to our practice in studying the Dharma. That through analysis and investigation, we can look deeply into the Dharma, study and practice, arrive at the correct conclusions and understandings that will inform our practice and help us to grow in our wisdom. And I have to say, at the first glance, when I look at these homages, they seem to defy that statement. There doesn't look like there's any reason to them. It looks like there's no logic to them. So I wanted to see how would I be able to incorporate His Holiness's directive into trying to deeply understand these verses. And at the same time, he has also said that the human mind is very complex and that it requires various approaches to be able to work with it. Okay, so there's no one foolproof method to be able to transform our minds, that there's not one tool that'll do the job. And so that was reassuring to know that as much as analysis, reason, and logic are the pivotal foundations for our practice, that at certain times of our practice, we need a lot of different tools. And then the other piece that came up as I was continually looking at these stanzas is the review that I did in chapter 3, the one that was called Bases of the Self, the Body and Mind. And there was a section in that really caught my attention about the conceptual mind. And as I've been starting to think about these and read the commentaries, how much the conceptual mind can really be, it's a huge, important piece to being able to understand the Dharma and how we interpret, how we translate the things that we hear. And I was really trying to say, well, can I commit to using my conceptual mind to help me to understand these homages and also to be able to create virtue? Because it can go through a whole lot of different directions. I wanted to see with the images and the symbolism in the verses, I wanted to make sure that my conceptual mind was on board to create virtue while I was trying to unpack this. And that Tibetan Buddhism has these very rich approaches to working with the mind. So, we've got analytical meditation, we've got shamatha, we have the mantra recitations, the use of logic and reason through our debate study and practice. And then the visualization, which really helps us when we're using images and symbols around how to think about the Buddha. To help us with this mind of ours that's got so many needs and so many ways it can go off. So there are a few texts and commentaries out there that describe and offer various interpretations of the homages and how to relate to Tara and how to think about her, which can really deepen our understanding of the Dharma. Because what I found that I really want to do and how these commentaries help is they help us to center on Tara as the manifestation of the Buddha's omniscient mind in the form of this enlightening activity, of which she is the strongest aspect in her form, and that her wisdom and bodhicitta are where these manifestations, these forms come from, that she is compelled by her bodhicitta and wisdom. Everything she does is for the sole purpose of benefiting sentient beings. And that the qualities and the powers and the abilities she has are one of the ways that she's able to do this, to be able to benefit us in these myriad of ways. And that by thinking and unpacking these homages, my hope was to be able to be inspired or to deepen my understanding that I have that potential as well to be just like her. So then I had to, then all this kind of like, well, how do I deal with these verses? Because they're kind of outrageous. I mean, there's some really powerful images that don't seem to make sense, that seem fantastical, that seem otherworldly, that just seem out of the norm of reason and logic. So I had to approach this in a number of ways. What kind of mind do I have? What kind of conditioning on the conceptual level can I bring to be able to enhance and to really deeply go into these stanzas that'll be helpful? So the first thing that I wanted to do, and I started to do a few weeks ago, usually when I was going to bed at night, is that I would try to wrap my mind around the idea of what would having an omniscient mind be like. What would it be like to have a mind like Tara? To know all objects in existence, both ultimately and conventionally. To be able to know every being's karma, what they're dealing with in this life, how they got here, what are some of the cause and conditions that they've had to deal with, what are the dispositions that they have now, what might be ripening in their life. To be able to see the dying and the rebirth of all beings. I mean, this is what some of these images in the homages have been bringing to life for me, is what she's able to perceive. How to have a mind of Tara, you would be able to cognize the moment that a sentient being had generated a spontaneous bodhicitta mind. To be able to witness that as a Buddha, and to be able to witness the moment or the series of moments where an Arya Bodhisattva has stepped into the path of no more learning, that the cognitive obscurations are being removed, to be able to have this kind of understanding of the process of life of all beings. And so before I would go to bed at night, I would think of some of these powers and some of these abilities that Tara had and say, well, how would I as a Buddha, how would I manifest in Washington, D.C.? What kind of form would I be able to take if there was somebody in D.C., and there probably are, that have a karmic connection to a Buddha? What would I do in Yemen? What would it be like? What would I know? How could I help? So this was helpful for me to be able to use my imagination to think what an omniscient mind like Tara's would be, because these stanzas are really requiring us to really expend some energy and some imagination on how to perceive Tara. And that the homages contain some really vast thinking language that describes what this omniscient mind of Tara is capable of doing, both literally and figuratively. And that Venerable has said many times that we know how to visualize just about anything that we're familiar with. But when it comes to these very big kind of vast thinking language and these types of descriptions in these homages, I think, at least for me, I had a hard time believing that I could really get into them, but I didn't have the power to visualize flaming wreaths of light and blazing light and stomping and stamping on different individuals. Why does Tara do that? What's going on here? I didn't think that I had the capacity to really use my imagination to open up these symbolic gestures and mudras and activities that she was doing in these verses. And then I said, I don't think it's entirely true that we don't have the ability to do this kind of vast thinking, this vast imagining. And Venerable Chuni made a reference to it yesterday in her motivation, that I have been looking at very deeply on what kind of mind do I bring into understanding these particular homages, is that we have been raised on special effects in our Western culture ever since I was a kid. Starting with Walt Disney. The entertainment industry has brought to life the most unbelievable characters, objects, world systems that have literally captured our imagination. I don't know about you, but I have completely, through the course of my 65 years, well, probably it's been over 20 now since I went to the movies, is that I have let myself be totally transported to all kinds of unbelievable experiences. And that the capacity of the human mind to create and be transported with the help of, let's say, computer technology, robotics, 3D printers, I don't know how they pull this stuff off, but it comes from the human mind, the human conceptual mind that can invent and create these things. We are raised on all sorts of unbelievable people, creatures that do extraordinary things, captivated by them, and they don't even exist. They are make-believe, conjured up by the human mind. And they stay in there. I can tell you that they're still in there. When I've been going through this whole idea, I thought of Close Encounters yesterday, which was 1977. I can almost repeat the plot line to that movie. The images of the spaceships and the five, it's in my mind after 44 years, it's still in there. So the capacity of the conceptual mind to take these very vast images, these very fantastical images, and bring them to life in our own imagination. And that I could use this way my conceptual mind remembers these kind of things to use them with these homages to Tara. Because unlike the special effects in these movies about these fictional characters and places that don't exist, these amazing images of Tara symbolize endeavors by somebody who does exist. We have to continue to remember that Tara is an existent. She is not make-believe. But we need to get used to our conceptual minds equating vast thinking and amazing activity, manifesting from the mind of profound wisdom and limitless love, limitless powers of emanation existing in real time in the form of Tara, who is an existent. So switching the mind that is captured by fantasy to be able to use it conceptually to imagine the powers and the abilities of someone who loves us beyond words, that emanates countless forms in whatever it takes to help and guide us. That is the cause of her existence. And that she's an extremely virtuous object to focus this conceptual mind on, rather than an object of attachment. So that's the first thing that I brought into my unpacking of these homages, is to say, I have the capacity to have very vast thinking, very vast imagery when it comes to her powers and her abilities. The second thing that I brought into it is to understand that symbols and metaphors permeate our culture and our daily lives as well. Because these homages are filled with metaphors. They're filled with symbolism. That everything, objects, peoples, rites of passage, music, activities, everything from Santa Claus to the World Trade Towers, to wedding rings, to a little blue bird, to a statue with a woman holding her, a torch up in the air, the Statue of Liberty, even a piece of cloth with blue with pointed stars and red and white stripes. We impute so much meaning onto these objects, and they elicit a lot of feelings, all kinds of feelings for us. Understanding that symbols go very deep into our minds for good or for not, whether we are aware of it or not. And that is helpful to know when I start reading about the meaning and the purpose of the images, the postures, the colors, and the activities of Tara in the verses, that these images weave threads of thought training, teachings on emptiness and bodhicitta, the qualities of the three jewels within them. And they can elicit, if I pay attention and use the symbolism and take it to heart, it can bring up a lot of very, very powerful feelings, gratitude, understanding, and respect for this relationship that I'm trying to cultivate with Tara. So these wild images are not invitations to go into escapism, but to go deeply into the Dharma with Tara as our guide. So I found that these conditioned cultural activities of my mind can be used in an extremely virtuous endeavor. So as I go into seeing that, investigating the images, the symbolism, and the meanings, that I can see, even, I'm only like on verse 8 now because I've had to unpack them so deeply, is that I'm seeing thought training in them. I've seen my refuge deepen just at the thought of my relationship to her. Meditation on emptiness, that she doesn't exist as she appears, the activities that she endeavors to engage in to connect with us are not inherently existent, that she is a dependent arising, and that especially her bodhicitta is like the pivotal force on why she's doing what she's doing. So in the process of unpacking these images, that His Holiness's directive about using logic and reasoning really does come into play as you start to see what all of this means. And so what I'm hoping to do the next time is to bring a few of those stanzas and to kind of share with you through the commentaries that Venerable has given on them. And there's another beautiful book called the Tara's Enlightening Activity from two Nyingma Lamas, that is a beautiful supplement to her commentary, to show you how I've been able to use this conditioned conceptual imagination that has captured our minds in a cultural way with entertainment, whatever, and how to use the deep impact of symbolism to be able to bring Tara to life for myself and to really engage with these verses on a very, very different level than I've ever had been. I mean, I didn't understand most of them. And through the commentaries and using these two forms of using my mind in a virtuous way, it has totally just changed my relationship to the homages as I've ever been able to capture before. So, so the conditioning that we've had as Westerners or as Americans, I mean, it can really be the cause of a lot of our misconceptions. But this conceptual mind can also be a very profound tool for being able to create virtue and to accumulate a lot of merit. And we're going to need it all the way to the path of seeing and beyond. So it might as well put it to good use rather than wasting it on, all sorts of other things that don't really help in the long run.